Nearly 1 year after the deadly rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, PBS's Frontline and ProPublica are investigating white supremacists' resurgence in America with a new special entitled Documenting Hate, Charlottesville. Here's a clip from the report that premieres tomorrow night, and some of the scenes might be disturbing to watch.
The Charlottesville rally was supposed to be about a Confederate monument. But anyone who was paying attention could see that it was about more than a single statue. It felt like a national reckoning around race was coming. I came here to ask questions. But as the day unraveled into chaos around me, one thing became clear. This was not a place to listen or understand. Charlottesville was a crime scene.
Frontline correspondent and reporter for ProPublica, A.C. Thompson, joins us now. And A.C., what did you find in your search for whether or not justice was served out of Charlottesville?
You know, I think one of the key things for us is that we encountered one person after another who had been violent in rallies after Charlottesville and before Charlottesville. And the authorities hadn't taken these people into custody. They weren't aware of the crimes that they had engaged in. And there really had been no consequences for them. And so what we did is we went looking for these violent actors, not the people who wanted the spotlight, but the people who didn't want to be in the spotlight, who wanted to sort of operate from the shadows and engage in criminal activity. And there were a lot of them out there.
So why no consequences? 1 year after Charlottesville, why no consequences?
You know, that's a good question. What we know is that a lot of these local authorities, for example, in Berkeley, California to Charlottesville, California, don't have a ton of resources to go after these characters. And in some cases, they haven't really been that vigorous in going after these characters. We now believe that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is more interested in some of these groups and is active. But it's still an open question why some of these people haven't been brought to justice.
So what's the consequence that follows from the failure to follow up? I mean, so we know what just happened in Portland, Oregon. Right. Where 4 people were arrested after the Patriot prayer. So, but what are the consequences that follow from this?
You know, I think the concern is that people that are able to go from one rally to the next and physically attack people and basically then return to their normal lives, they feel like, hey, I can do this, I can get away with this, and it sort of engenders more violence.
So how is it that a collection of neo-Nazis, stone-cold racists, from across the country, from many, many different states across the country, gather in Charlottesville for one specific purpose? Everybody in Charlottesville, once they get there, knows what the purpose is. Where was the preparation, the police planning?
That's a totally crucial question, and I really feel like it's been overlooked. There was a 200-page report that came out after Charlottesville that said, hey, here are all the failures, and they were many. They were intelligence failures on the front end. They were failures to really plan. They were failures between the Virginia State Police and the local police to coordinate and even be able to talk to one another on the same radio frequencies. But most importantly, what we know now is that basically the police said, we are going to allow this to escalate, and we're going to allow violence to happen, and then when that violence has happened, we'll have a reason to declare an unlawful assembly and clear these people out. And I think that helped to lead to the fatal consequences of that day.
So it's a year later, right? And I'm going to ask you the biggest overarching question I can, right? You take everything that's happened, all the attention to Charlottesville, what the president said, the counter reaction, right, the recruiting videos, just the totality of everything, right? A year later, is Charlottesville been good or bad for the cause of white supremacy in America?
It actually works in 2 ways, I would say. I think, or even 3 ways. A lot of people have left the movement. They feel like they were chastened by what happened. They don't want to be part of it. Other people have said, we have to organize in different ways. We're not going to do big rallies anymore. We're going to do flash mobs. We're going to do postering. We're going to do banner drops on the highway. And a third group of people have said, we're going to do terrorism. We're going to go underground. We're done with protests. We're done with politicking. Now we're going to start killing people, and we're going to start blowing stuff up. So it goes in 3 different ways.
How many people were at Charlottesville that day when it all blew up? How big were the crowds? How big were the opposing forces?
You know, that's still in debate. If you look at the numbers, some people put the white supremacist side at about 500 with more people on the opposing side. I think that's probably about right. So you had mostly white supremacists, you had, around 500 white supremacists, a bigger group of opponents, but in the streets directly in front of them, it was actually a smaller group. Most of the opponents were nonviolent and they were away from that scene.
But in a nation of 305 million, 500 really bad guys, that's not a lot.
No.
You know what I mean? So what does it imply to you?
There's two things, right? And so one thing is I think that they're reflective of a deeper fissure in society. That's a key thing, right? Is that they are the extreme edge of a deeper movement and a deeper unease. And I think there's a lot of white people who have, to some extent, in the last few years said, hey, I'm unhappy about illegal immigration, I'm unhappy about immigration, period, and have sort of returned to this nativist, racist rhetoric. And these guys are the most extreme version of it. But the other thing is you don't need a lot of people to do extreme violence. We know that from Tim McVeigh. Tim McVeigh killed 168 people basically by himself. And so when you have people that are this motivated to do harm, you don't need a lot of them.
You know, Casey Hunt, though, if you go back over the Trump presidency, and yes, there are bizarre things happening every day. There are abnormalities politically. But I looked at three events that have caused Donald Trump, I think, the greatest political consequence. One was Charlottesville. Two was ripping babies from their mothers at the border. And three was what happened in Helsinki and Vladimir Putin. I think the long-term impact of that will be great, but also great for the Republican Party. I think going back to Charlottesville, wasn't that really the beginning of almost, a dramatic abandonment from suburban moms, suburban women, and suburban voters that were formerly Republicans who helped elect a Democratic governor in Virginia and helped elect a Democratic senator in Alabama.
Mm-hmm. I think that we are still facing, as a country, pretty crucial tests around exactly those moments that you point out. And this one in Charlottesville was, in some ways, the beginning, also the sharpest, most emotional in many ways, kind of crystallizing all of the things that this president did as a candidate in pushing on, or ripping open, really, these wounds that have been a part of the American fabric since the beginning of our country. And it's a real test, I think, for American voters to see, okay, are those women that you mentioned, are they going to come out to the polls in droves in 2018 and then in 2020? Or is this president's strategy of inflaming these racial wounds going to really be shown to actually have been effective, Joe?
Yeah, and Eddie, I ask you the same question about the long-term political impact of Charlottesville. We certainly saw in Alabama black voters coming out in higher numbers than even for Barack Obama's elections in 8 and 12 in a presidential year versus an off-year special election, which is it's an extraordinary political event. And also in Virginia, does Charlottesville and beyond, is that what actually breaks Donald Trump's hold over a Washington that's run by conservative Republicans?
Well, I think it certainly will be part of it, part of the reason, Joe. We will see Barack Obama numbers, I believe, among African-American voters in the midterm and in the 2020 election. But I want to be very clear. We need to move from melodrama, where we have our obvious villains and our obvious heroes and our desire for a happy ending. And we need to understand how deeply tragic this is. AC said something that's really important, that the white supremacists in Charlottesville were the radical edge of a deeper, deeper current. And so we need to understand that all of this stuff has to be made explicit for us to imagine America differently. If we don't, if we fall back into the old mode, then we will find ourselves on this racial hamster wheel again. And we can't have that happen. Hopefully we're moving into a different moment, but I'm not sure. Our history says we won't, but I'm not sure.
The film is documenting hate. Charlottesville premieres tomorrow night on PBS and online at pbs.org/frontline. And you can read related reporting at ProPublica.org. A.C. Thompson, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me
for
here.
being on this morning. Up next, Governor Andrew Cuomo is picking a fight with the NRA. We'll talk about that and the primary challenger he is facing this fall. The New York Democrat joins us straight ahead on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.